I surprised Patrick. He was trying to slip that last bit of coffee in before things got started. Hey, everybody, welcome to EDBEAT. We are really excited to talk to you today. That's my favorite introduction, Patrick. We have so much to say. Do we really?
We do.
We always do. This is the truth. So this week, no guests, just Patrick and I. And I think you got a pretty meaty topic there, Mr. Patrick. If you check out Cayman Current, there is an interesting story about, and I was trying to find it and pull it up because we know I'm a little slow on the button pushing here. But if you go to caymancurrent.org, there is a story about the UCCI board raise being funded essentially by a reduction in scholarships. And this is quite, there are these stories that people just love to talk about. This is one of those stories, I think, because I argue that, and you're going to have to provide the context for this, I argue that unless people are not receiving a scholarship at all because of a decision that's made, technically speaking, that's not what's actually occurring. But I don't actually know in this case. So Patrick, who's Mr. Movember here with his beard and mustache. Patrick, let's get started by giving people a little bit of context on what the heck I'm talking about.
Sure. Yeah. So we have a story online right now. Actually, there's 3 separate stories, including one letter to the editor. So chronologically speaking, earlier this week, Cabinet has under the new PAC government, Cabinet releases these kind of summaries of decisions that were made in the last Cabinet meeting. So we got this statement from Cabinet saying Cabinet did this, Cabinet did that. And a couple things caught my eye and other people in the media's eyes. And that was that they're raising the pay for UCCI board members. And I don't know if a lot of people know this, but the Cayman Islands government has a lot of boards. Like I think there's over 100. And the majority of the boards, the members either aren't compensated, they just do it on a purely voluntary basis, or they're paid somewhere between $100, $150 a month, they call it a stipend. So here's money for your time spending poring over these documents, making decisions, possibly making people angry, etc. But there are a handful of boards where board members are paid a lot more. And so those boards would be the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority, the Auditor's Oversight Authority. Cayman Airways is a little different and is interesting because the board members aren't paid, but they do receive either free or reduced rate they get plane tickets, basically. And this has added up according to a report the Auditor General did that the Cayman Airways board actually gets a substantial number of airline tickets. So up until just now, the UCCI board was actually among one of the lowest compensated boards, and they met on average around 8 times a year, and board members were paid total about $1,000 per year for their time. Well, as of September 1st now, which coincidentally, the UCCI board has a new chairperson. People will know him, Gilbert McLean, public figure. And so as of September 1st, the chairman of UCCI's board will now be paid $4,000 per month, which is $48,000 per year. So instead of the $1,000 per year, that's up to $48,000. The deputy chairperson will make $2,000 per month, or $24,000 a year. And the board members themselves will get paid $1,000 per month, or $12,000 per year. And I guess before we talk about the figures, there is a couple of big asterisks. And one of those asterisks is the UCCI administration. So let's say Stacy McAfee and JD Mosley Matchett, who were on the program a few weeks ago. So like the UCCI staff, they don't make decisions on the board stipend. I mean, how could they? The board is an oversight authority. So this funding decision is made by Cabinet, I believe, in consultation with the Ministry of Education. So it's a Cabinet level decision that's made. And the other footnote is there are several members on the board who say Dr. McAfee is on the board, and some UCC, ex officio So public servants who are representatives of the ministries, they are not eligible to receive the stipend at all. So if you are a public or civil servant, you don't get the stipend. So it's purely the private sector members who would get a stipend. And I guess the last footnote is kind of traditionally at UCCI, and I think this is the case for a lot of boards. Board members may have received a stipend, but then they turn around and would donate it right back to the entity that they're serving. So in the past, the UCCI board members who are getting this, $100 at a time, they would turn and donate this into a scholarship fund for UCCI. So that was kind of the first story that the current RAN is just strictly reporting that the UCCI board was getting a big pay raise from $1,000 a month to, in the case of the board chairman, $4,000 a month. That puts UCCI board now on par with those entities I mentioned earlier, such as the SEMA board and also UVREG. So that was story number one. And then we followed up with story number two. And story number two.
Day.
Yeah. So I guess it's important to know that the basis for this reporting, where it was a document issued by cabinet about the pay raise, and then I got the context for this from Auditor General's report from a few years ago on board compensation. And then I knew where the decision-making authority was because we had the university college law. So we had a piece of legislation, an Auditor General's report, and a statement from report from cabinet. So then the second story, we call it the follow-up story. I reached out to cabinet and the Ministry of Education, and I asked them some questions about why did you decide to change the stipend? How did you arrive at this figure? And one pointed question is where is the money coming from? So the second question is actually, if you do the math, in total, the UCCI board pay will cost about $144,000 a year. So where does this money come from? Well, also in the publication of the cabinet decisions, they put in that they were reducing scholarship funding. This is for local and overseas scholarships. So they were taking $250,000 from that bucket of money, and they were putting $250,000 into kind of the general funding for UCCI. So I asked the cabinet, I said, hey, is the board pay coming out of this reduction in scholarship funding? And they wrote back and they confirmed that yes, taking the money out of the bucket of scholarship funding is going to pay for the board members' pay raises, and it's also going to pay for the hiring of an executive secretary for the board, and then I think they're going to do an HR audit, and then there's some costs associated with recruitment, and that, I believe, is the meat of the story. And then, of course, well, not of course, but then other media organizations have also been reporting on this with their own angles and perspectives, because we're just strictly education, right? And then the Cayman Compass picked it up and did their own story. And so there's been, some commentary and some light and some heat, mostly on the internets. And at this point, I will advise that the Cayman Compass does not have institutional editorial opinion. So I don't get into things like, is this good? Is this bad?
Right.
Do I think this is the sound strategy? Do I think this is not the way to go? I stay out of that. So
Yeah.
I'm just saying this is what these guys used to get paid. This is what they're getting paid now. And this is where the money's coming from. There you go.
And I mean that approach, Patrick, I just think it's sometimes you report the facts and allow people to make what perspective they may make of it. Sometimes something like this is not significant. Sometimes it is. It just depends on where you're coming from and how you see it, which is why the editorial letter, basically, I thought was interesting. Professionally, as a reporter, it's interesting to talk about and look about. Personally, I may have completely different views about that. And personally, I think the key thing that's missing for me in terms of information is that's great that you've reallocated funds. Technically, not a problem unless somebody does not get a scholarship that they deserve because we've, done something else with the money. And that for me that would be the next story is has that occurred? Are we turning people away? And even beyond that, technically, you could ask if we don't have enough applicants for this big pool of funds for scholarships, whether local or international, what's the problem there? Because in theory, you want as many students as possible. You want to be begging for more scholarship money because you don't have enough.
Right.
Does that make sense? So, I mean,
Yeah.
for me, that's sort of the next trail, the rest of the trail. But
Yeah, and I also think it's important to point out that this government has, in the last, they've really increased the local and overseas scholarship funding. And we can tease a story that'll come next week, which, even creating kind of their headline Cayman Scholar Award, where the top boy and top girl, to borrow secondary school terminology, they'll each will be eligible for $100,000 per year scholarship to what they were calling an Ivy League or gold tier university. So coming up next week, I've found the list of what they consider gold level universities. So we'll take a look, because it was surprising to me, the criteria that went into it and what the list looks like. So I think it's interesting. Yeah, and you mentioned our letter to the editor. Always happy to get, we call them viewpoints. Happy to get viewpoints from the community. Please email me your thoughts and ramblings and arguments, and love to consider them for publication. So this is a good one, and it's somebody who knows a lot more about this than I do. And is a man named Tom Simpson, and he is a former board member of UCCI. And Tom and his wife Beverly, I like to say they put their money where their mouths are. They have created and endowed a $50,000 per year program that gives scholarships to UCCI for students on a needs-based basis. So these are students who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford to go. And so Tom, and his letter, he says, he has a lot of interesting points that I think you should read and not listen to me talk about. But that he basically argues that the whole thinking behind scholarship funding and funding of UCCI needs to be reimagined. So generally, he says you have this big pool of scholarship money. He points out that even though he says 10 times as many kids go to UCCI as attend institutions overseas, yet the UCCI kids get 1/10 the amount of scholarship funding that the overseas students do. So he says the pool for overseas scholarships is bigger than UCCI's annual budget. So he thinks that they need to shift the funding for overseas scholarships and pump it back into the local public university. And then the second component that I think is interesting is he says these scholarships shouldn't be awarded to, it shouldn't just be a merit-based thing, like the top performing kids who may or may not be wealthy get the scholarship because of their grades. He says the focus should be on this needs-based. So the kids that otherwise wouldn't be able to go to college should be looked upon favorably for this funding. And I think it's a really interesting, valid viewpoint. Tom put a lot of his own time and money into this, so I encourage everybody to read his thoughtful commentary.
And while I have my own thoughts about it, I do agree it's a very interesting perspective to look at. I do question sometimes how the question of who can afford what that's based on sometimes. And I do recall a few years back, there was I think it was an A-level scholarship, something like that, where because someone, I don't know, owned a property, they were disqualified from, and again, don't know can't drill down to the truth on this one. I just remember the general story. And I thought about that, and I thought, that's unfortunate, because you've essentially ruled someone out from a key component of higher learning because they paid off the mortgage of their house, or whatever it was, something
Right.
similarly. And so, I think you would have to be very careful about how you determine need. Annual income, certainly, that looks great on paper, but doesn't factor in, I don't
Yeah.
know, cost of
Well, and
living.
especially when you're you happen to live in a country that there's no way to account for anybody's
Yeah, yeah,
annual pay.
yeah, yeah,
Without an income tax, there's really no mechanism in place to check how much income someone's making.
yeah.
Um, and the needs assessment unit grapples with this all the time, right? Like that's the big
It's so
portion of
hard
their
to
job is
do.
assessing the need. I mean,
It is challenging. And we beat up sometimes on the needs assessment unit, but I'm like, how do you know that a lot of this information you're being given is correct? How much time do you have to go back checking every single component of an application? So I imagine a similar potential problem for scholarships as well. I can see the challenges, yet the concept that those who are in need should receive, if possible, funding to pursue an education that's going to improve the quality of their lives. I totally get that. I do sometimes take issue, and this is because of my own personal bias with ICCI, right? So I have this history that goes back to when I was 3 and 4, that the public university and the private, nonprofit, I think sometimes it would be better if everyone actually really did sit down around the same table, though, and really looked at what's going to be best to serve the country collectively and allocate funding based on that, not just what institution it is. It would be similar, I guess, in private sector to me thinking, well, you've got 12 companies that all do the same sort of thing. They're in competition with each other. But in this case, what we're looking at is something that's for the greater good of the community. So how can we best serve our young people and the future of the country? To me, that seems that would, money is better spent in this case, focused on the right end game. But,
yeah.
I have a
Well,
view.
and then the UCCI, ICCI interaction and debate is something that comes up, strangely enough, every 4 years during the political campaign season, and then it seems to not be talked about again.
I'm old enough to have seen it happen quite a few 4 year
Yeah,
cycles, so which is an interesting thing in and of itself. But there is always going to be some discussion about, I think, what does Cayman really need to do in order to best prepare its students. And interestingly enough, and he's lived through some scandals since then, but I heard a speech by Kenover Watson quite a few years ago at an ICCI graduation, and Sipsty, that's Patrick Sipsty, and one of the things he talked about was competition with the globe. That we were going to be competing with people all around the world. So as a Caymanian who may not be able to easily compete around the global community initially, at least at first, you have to prepare your workforce for that. It doesn't mean you don't have talent or ability. It just means it's more than just being able to. It's having all the things moving in the right direction to make that the case. So I found that, and that was, gosh, Patrick, I don't want to say how many years ago that was. It was a long time. But it did speak
donkey
to
years.
donkey years. It did speak to the need to focus or look ahead. And what is it you like to say? Not just have the 15 or 25-year plan, but also the roadmap to that plan. Because the more resources, not just money, but the more intellectual resources and experience resources that play into that planning, the better off we're going to be.
Yeah, and sometimes I wonder about. It's interesting to me. There's a dichotomy of in the kind of the high level conversation that goes around in terms of the vision of the future for how to prepare Cayman's youth, where they say Cayman, on the one hand, is Cayman is not only increasingly globalized society, like it's kind of the true most globalized society that you can find anywhere on the world. Like there's 135
Nations,
more
yeah.
nationalities than there are nations in the world in Cayman, and we're we're competing in technologies enabled by, sectors enabled by technology with people who could be sitting anywhere in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the other hand, a lot of the plans seem to be, well, how can we serve this young community, this young demographic without them ever having to leave the island? Like, a lot of it is, we're going to keep improving our programs physically on island so they never have to leave. And you say, well, can you really truly prepare somebody to compete globally without them ever leaving their own home?
And I question that. I don't know the answer for sure, but I do see to me, there is something, and this is so hard for me because I love Cayman, right? And I hated, in some respects, having to leave for as long as I did to gain the experience I did. But it was incredibly valuable to me as well, both during certain portions of my adult life, but also as a student. So I did some of my education here, some overseas. I probably came back and forth more than most people did. But I learned incredible things about society and people, and new ideas for how things could be done that perhaps I could have read online if that was the thing, but I don't know that would have had the same impact as that interpersonal connection. So I can watch a webinar, and that's great, but there is a different experience about being at that event and talking to people on the coffee breaks, and you know what I mean? They're different. And I do have an interest in exploring the idea of whether you do need to spend some time traveling or doing, a year or two abroad, whether that's in your education or your career, just in order to widen your scope about what's possible. But I don't know. For me, this is theory.
Yeah,
I'm basing this on, I don't know. But I do know in my parents' case, the concern was a lot of families in Cayman at the time couldn't go overseas.
Mm-hmm.
It was too expensive. They may already have started their families. And so providing a solid education opportunity on island was critical at that point. And I think it still is important. But I also think that there are other options as well. And so exploring what needs to be most of value versus using the best of what the world has to offer, I feel like that's an important conversation to have.
Yeah, and I think there are examples. Say the Mormon church, right? And they have the big, I forget what the mission. So when you come to a certain age, you go on the mission and you travel and you go see things, and before you come take those lessons back to your local community. And I believe it, might be the like the Amish or Mennonites or Quakers. I'm not really well versed in this, but they say when you come of age,
do that one, but maybe.
yeah, go learn about
the world,
what the outside world is like, and then when you come back, you're voluntarily being a part of this community because you want to, and so it's not like the M. Night Shyamalan movie,
which is your whole frame of reference for this. I'm kidding.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm kidding, but you know what I mean. It is that idea of, and interestingly enough, we get so caught up in the viability component of the equation, which is important because people have to get paid, and it has to work. This is life. But I do wonder sometimes where that little think tank is in the Cayman landscape that is looking beyond what we're doing today to really examining what we could or should be doing going forward. The ones who challenge and question, is the way we're doing it now the best possible, option for what we're trying to achieve?
Yeah.
I don't know who
only
that is.
EDBEAT. Keep tuning into EDBEAT for the big ideas
that we get from M. Night Shyamalan.
And the movie Kingpin.
Hey, don't knock the Kingpin.
Yeah. So moving on to something we know what we're talking about.
Much better idea.
You had one of something I look forward to every month on the website, and running on screens everywhere. And it looks like you did something a little differently. this
Yeah,
time.
it's kind of fun. All right, so I'm going to effort showing the video without sharing the audio of the video. So this definitely, I could be taking some of these classes that these young people are doing for sure. So when we have the midterm break period, how sometimes um, I'll get there eventually, I promise. Most of our classrooms of the month focus on what I call a traditional classroom. Not all the time, but a lot. And I found interesting the Three Girls and a Kiln summer camp. And so here's my little YouTube screen. And what was kind of interesting for me about this, well, first of all, it is post-COVID, right? So I wondered how you're going, I know, Brady Bunch, how you're going to have these sorts of classes with the interaction between the kids and adults in small spaces. So I'm like, I wonder if that's going to work. But I thought they did a really good job. The energy of the teachers at Three Girls in a Kiln really worked really hard with the kids to keep them engaged and involved. They provided a lot of different kinds of activities. Two of the three girls from Three Girls in a Kiln, they are actually former teachers anyway, who really do believe quite strongly in art and its value to the development of young people. But they also think this is great fun too, right? So they have a fantastic time sharing what they know. And I talked to a bunch of the kids, not all of them on camera because some were shyer than others, as usual. But the kids talked about how it helps them with their self-expression. I mean, if you look at the ages, and this particular set was all girls. It isn't always that way. It's different mixtures. But if you look at the ages of the girls, they're at kind of a vulnerable stage in their lives where they're working on their self-identity, their confidence. Who are we going to be? What kind of people are we going to be going forward? And the art and the crafts projects really help them express themselves. Not to mention, as you can see, there's a lot of fine motor skills going on there. So that I thought that was interesting too. So every month we try to find a classroom of some kind. Sometimes they're adult classrooms as well. And just honestly, it's to look at what they're doing well, what they've learned, how they're growing. It really sometimes turns into a teacher of the month because the teachers often are the drivers in that classroom environment. But I really enjoyed the hands-on. There's so I don't have as many young children as you do, Patrick, but I've had a wide spread of children, right? So I had 3 boys and then I had a girl. And one of the ways that I found it easiest to communicate with my boys was when we were doing something together. So I was a master Lego builder, right, for many, many years, because we would work on the Legos, and then somehow that would give us an opportunity to, share ideas and feelings and how are things going without the pressure on them. I made this assumption that, it's a sexist assumption, I guess, but that girls just naturally all talk and share all their ideas all the time. Untrue. Some girls don't do that. So I know he's like, hey. So
Strong
the
coffee.
strong coffee, and it was not an earthquake. I found that also with my daughter, it was important sometimes for us to have similar hands-on activities that took the pressure off me trying to drill into her mind and find out who she is, make her completely uncomfortable. And to do the sorts of activities as well as a relationship building thing. So, I mean, yeah, I'm a big proponent of traditional classrooms and education, but I also think you need to also explore all the sides of your education. And some of that is about creativity and self-expression. And also, there's hammers and nails involved too. So that's always good. How not to smash your finger while you're doing a project is also a very good skill to have. Oh, and by the way, anybody, anytime, feel free to nominate a classroom. You can send it to april@caymanspaces.com, or I have like 15 emails for this, or info@caymanlife.ky. And then we take it to the group and decide, who we're going to focus on that month and reach back out to you. But don't be shy, because it's not just for straight A classrooms or A+ classrooms or A-star classrooms. It's for students who are growing. And especially when you have a significant achievement that you've seen the group come together and do, we really do enjoy doing those as well. It doesn't just have to be a shiny program with bells and whistles. Oh, look, Patrick fell asleep. That's so funny. He really didn't. His internet froze, but it looks like he fell asleep, which is just as good. Oh, I'm amusing myself to no end right now. Patrick, it looked like you fell asleep while I was talking.
Oh yeah, you should see what you look like.
It was good stuff. It was very good. Anyway.
Here, let me show you what you look like.
I'm quite
You
amused. Can
see
I see
that?
it? Did it work? No, you have
I've
to share
shared
your
my screen.
screen somehow. Maybe I didn't give you permission to share your screen. Oh, there you are. Look, here we go. Patrick, I think this is quite amusing.
Yeah,
Good
we're
time.
the
Good
A-star
times.
classroom.
Yeah. So I
Yeah, the
just
think tank of the future. That's what we're about.
we're all about technology and internet. So what I did say was I encouraged people to nominate any kind of classroom because the goal is to showcase progress, improvement, and just clever things that make people smile and happy.
Great. Keep up the good work.
I'm so proud of myself.
And I guess I only got one more minor item, and it's EDBEAT related, and that's that we're kind of experimenting with podcasts.
Yep.
So just in general, at the current, we're seeing if this is maybe a viable way to reach people. And rather than trying to create a podcast from scratch right away, uh, we're taking taking the EDBEAT episodes and turning them into podcasts.
Yep.
And have started pushing them on. I think it's on Google Play now, and just the big one, not SoundCloud.
Spotify.
Spotify, yeah. So we've added to Spotify. It's been approved on Google Playlist, and we'll just put it on Apple and
Yeah.
etc. And start making those links, publish and sharing them. So
Yeah.
that'll be another option for everybody
Because
when the tourists and morning traffic returns. Why not listen to EDBEAT?
EDBEAT on your way to work, man. but you can also watch us and listen to us and maybe not read us though, because that would be terrifying for people.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, thanks so much, Patrick. As always, we'll talk again soon. And don't forget to check out caymancurrent.org. I'm going to go right now, feed the dog, and post this on the Cayman Life TV channel and online sometime soon.
Great. Thanks, April.
All right. Have a good one. Peace out.